So let's talk about one of the most unhinged love stories in human history. And I use love story very loosely here, because this thing makes Romeo and Juliet look like a tax audit. His name was Carl Tanzler, though he liked to call himself Count Karl von Cosel, because apparently pretending to be royalty was easier than getting therapy. He was a German-born radiologist working at a hospital in Key West, Florida during the 1930s, a time when you could get away with basically anything if you wore a lab coat and had a decent mustache. One day, a young Cuban-American woman named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos came to the hospital with tuberculosis, and Carl saw her once and decided, yep, that's my wife, destiny, soulmate. I'm sure she'll love me back, despite the fact that I'm old enough to be her dad and slightly smell like formaldehyde. He became obsessed, builds her a homemade X-ray machine and writes her poetry, obsessed. He showered her with gifts, jewelry, and creepy letters. The man basically invented the romantic stalker archetype before Hollywood made it mainstream. Unfortunately for Carl's delusional fairy tale, Eleanor died in 1931. For most people, this would be the tragic end of a sad infatuation. But Carl Tanzler wasn't most people. He attended her funeral, built her a massive tomb, and somehow convinced her family to let him pay for it. What they didn't know was that he'd secretly made himself the only one with a key. And you already know where this is going, because no one with a private key to a mausoleum ever uses it for normal, wholesome reasons. 2 years after her death, Tanzler decided that being separated from his true love was just too painful. So like any completely normal guy, he broke into her tomb at night, stuffed her decaying body into a toy wagon, and wheeled her home like a deranged Victorian Santa Claus. Once there, he started the most horrifying DIY project in history. Her body was falling apart, so he used coat hangers to hold her bones together, replaced her rotting skin with wax and silk cloth, and used glass eyes to make her beautiful again. Her hair was falling out, so he made her wigs out of it, using her own hair, mind you, which her mother had given him earlier as a keepsake. And as for the smell, yeah, that was a problem too. Carl dealt with decomposition the same way frat boys deal with dirty laundry, by spraying it with chemicals and pretending it's fine. He stuffed rags soaked in perfume and formaldehyde inside her body cavity to keep the rot under control. And then, because why not, he slept beside her every night. He spoke to her, danced with her, even made her new clothes. And yes, in case you're wondering, forensic reports later suggested that he had modified the body to make it anatomically accessible. I'll let you figure out what that means, but let's just say this was not your average necromantic fairy tale. Neighbours started noticing weird things. People saw him through the window dancing with what looked like a giant doll, and sometimes music played late at night from his house. For 7 years he lived like this, a full-blown horror movie protagonist who somehow didn't get caught. It wasn't until 1940 that Elena's sister finally grew suspicious. She broke into his house, found the preserved body lying in the bed, and screamed so loud that half of Key West probably heard it. When police arrived, they found Elena's corpse so covered in wax and chemicals that she looked like a mannequin, except for the part where she wasn't. Tanzler was arrested and charged with maliciously destroying a grave, which honestly feels like an understatement for having a dead girlfriend for 7 years. But here's where it gets even crazier. The public didn't react with disgust. People lined up to see the body when it was put on display at the local funeral home. Thousands of visitors, like it was a carnival attraction. Newspapers called Tanzler eccentric and heartbroken, like he was some misunderstood artist instead of a one-man horror movie. And the worst part, he never saw what he did as wrong. Carl claimed he'd been visited by Elena's spirit, that she wanted him to take her body, and that they were spiritually married. After his release, because the statute of limitations expired, he built a life-sized effigy of her using a death mask and lived with that instead. When he died in 1952, they found him lying next to the dummy, still convinced that his wax-covered corpse wife was waiting for him in the afterlife. So yeah, that's the story of Carl Tanzler, the man who looked at death, love, and human decency and said, why not all three? It's grotesque, tragic, and completely unhinged, a blend of horror and absurdity that only real life could produce.